The Browns didn't win the game. The scoreboard didn't swing their way. And yet, when the dust settled, the NFL quietly made a decision that said far more than the final score ever could. While most people were focused on another frustrating loss, something else was happening behind the scenes, something that forced the entire league to stop, look twice, and acknowledge a reality Cleveland wasn't ready to confront. Because this wasn't supposed to happen like this. For weeks, the conversation around Shedeur Sanders wasn't about dominance or breakthroughs. It was about timing, readiness, whether he was being rushed, whether the situation around him was broken before he ever touched the field. Every throw he made felt like a referendum. Every mistake became fuel, and every good moment was quickly dismissed as a fluke. The narrative had already been written, or so people thought. Then, one performance shifted the balance. Not in a way that screamed for attention, not with chest-pounding celebration or forced headlines, but with something far more uncomfortable for the critics and decision-makers watching closely. Undeniable proof. The kind that doesn't ask for permission, the kind that doesn't care about excuses, narratives, or organizational dysfunction, the kind that makes silence louder than criticism. What made this moment hit harder wasn't just what Sanders did on the field, it was when it happened, right in the middle of uncertainty, right as questions were swirling behind closed doors, right when patience was thinning and confidence in leadership was being tested. Instead of shrinking under that pressure, he stepped straight into it, calm, aggressive, unapologetic. And that's what turned this from just another rookie performance into something much bigger. Because when the league made its choice, it wasn't rewarding potential, it wasn't betting on hype, it wasn't handing out sympathy, it was acknowledging something real, something that couldn't be ignored anymore. A rookie, surrounded by doubt, had forced his way into the conversation whether anyone was ready for it or not. And once that door opened, there was no closing it again. But here's the part most people aren't talking about yet, the part that makes this story even more compelling. This recognition didn't just validate Shedeur Sanders, it exposed the pressure building around him, it raised expectations overnight, and it quietly asked a question Cleveland has failed to answer for decades. What happens when a franchise finally finds the guy before it fixes everything else around him? Because what came next wasn't just impressive, it was a warning. The announcement itself didn't come with fireworks. No dramatic buildup, no league-wide celebration. It was just a simple confirmation. The votes were in, and the NFL had made its choice. But the quiet way it landed is exactly what made it so uncomfortable for the people paying attention. Because this wasn't an award the Browns were ready to discuss, and it definitely wasn't one critics wanted to explain away. Shedeur Sanders was named Pepsi Zero Sugar NFL Rookie of the Week. On the surface, that might sound like just another weekly honor, something that gets scrolled past on social media or mentioned once on a broadcast before moving on. But this one carried weight. This wasn't a fan poll driven by hype or a sympathy nod to a struggling team. This was a league-sanctioned acknowledgement that for that week, no rookie in the entire NFL impacted the game the way Sanders did. And that's where the tension started. Because the award didn't fit neatly into the story people had been telling. It didn't align with the doubts. It didn't match the hesitation. It didn't support the idea that Sanders needed more time, more shelter, or less responsibility. Instead, it challenged all of it in one clean decision. The league looked at everything that happened, compared it to every other rookie performance that week, and still landed on his name. Even more telling was who he beat out. Among the finalists was his own teammate, a reminder that Cleveland's offense wasn't just productive, it was dangerous. Yet when the final votes were counted, Sanders stood alone at the top. No shared spotlight, no asterisk, just a rookie quarterback forcing his way into relevance at a time when the franchise itself was struggling to find direction. That's why this award felt different. It wasn't celebrated loudly because it raised too many uncomfortable questions. If he could do this now, what did that say about the earlier doubts, about the delays, about the handling of his development. And why did it take a loss for the league to officially recognize what fans and analysts had started to feel beneath the surface? This wasn't a feel-good moment. It was a line in the sand. Sanders didn't ask for patience. He didn't wait for perfect conditions. He didn't benefit from stability or calm. He produced anyway, and the NFL had no choice but to acknowledge it. That kind of recognition doesn't just reward a performance. It shifts expectations, it changes timelines, and it puts pressure exactly where organizations hate it most. Because once a rookie earns that kind of validation, the conversation stops being about whether he belongs and starts becoming about whether the team around him is ready. And that's where this story really begins. From the opening snaps, it was clear this wasn't going to be one of those quiet rookie games where the quarterback simply tries to survive. There was intent behind every dropback, confidence in the way the ball came out. No hesitation, no playing small, no tiptoeing around the moment. Shedeur Sanders stepped onto that field like someone who knew the pressure was coming and decided to challenge it head-on instead of running from it. The defense didn't ease him into anything. They brought pressure early. They disguised coverages. They tested his patience. And instead of retreating into safe throws or predictable checkdowns, Sanders did the one thing rookies aren't supposed to do. He attacked. He pushed the ball downfield. He trusted his reads. He threw into windows that close faster in the NFL than anywhere else in football. Every successful completion felt like a statement, not just a gain. What made this performance impossible to ignore wasn't just volume, it was the tone. This wasn't empty production built on broken plays or defensive mistakes, it was controlled aggression. Sanders kept coming back for more, even after misses, even after pressure, even after the game refused to settle into a comfortable rhythm. The ball didn't float, it didn't wobble, it arrived on time, with purpose, again and again. And as the yards piled up, something shifted. The defense stopped playing cautiously and started reacting. Safeties backed up, corners hesitated, the entire structure bent to account for a quarterback who refused to be contained. That's when it became clear this wasn't just a hot stretch, it was a breakthrough. The kind that forces coaches on the sideline to abandon the original plan because the rookie across from them is rewriting it in real time. This was the first time Sanders truly looked like he belonged in that tier, not as a prospect, not as a project, but as a problem. A quarterback capable of flipping momentum with a single throw, capable of keeping drives alive with composure instead of chaos, capable of punishing defenses for every small mistake they made. And he didn't flinch when the game tightened. Every time the moment called for poise, he delivered confidence. When the pressure increased, he didn't speed up, he settled in. That's the part that separates flashes from foundations. Anyone can make a throw, not everyone can make the next one, especially when the defense knows what's coming. By the time the night was over, the result on the scoreboard barely told the story, because what Sanders put on tape wasn't something the league could debate or downplay. It was clear, it was repeatable, and it was backed by control, not chaos. That's why the NFL didn't have a choice, because when a rookie plays like that, fearless, composed, and in command, recognition stops being optional, it becomes inevitable. And just when defenses thought they had seen the full picture, Sanders added another layer that changed everything. As impressive as the throws were, they weren't the reason this performance crossed the line from memorable to dangerous. What truly separated this game from a typical breakout was what happened when the passing lanes disappeared, when coverage tightened, when the pocket collapsed. That's where Sanders showed something defenses can't scheme away. He didn't panic when the first read vanished. He didn't force hero throws just to prove a point. Instead, he adapted. The moment protection broke down, Sanders turned pressure into opportunity, slipping out of trouble and turning dead plays into positive yards, not with reckless scrambling, but with controlled movement. Eyes still downfield, body balanced, understanding exactly where the leverage was. That mobility changed the entire equation. Defenses thrive on predictability. They want rookie quarterbacks planted in one spot, locked into timing, dependent on structure. Sanders refused to give them that comfort. Every time a defender hesitated for half a second, every time a lane opened just enough, he took it. He didn't need a designed run to make an impact. He became the variable they couldn't account for. And then came the moment that made it undeniable. Near the goal line, with space shrinking and pressure rising, Sanders didn't look for an escape hatch. He committed. He read the defense, trusted his instincts, and attacked the opening himself. No hesitation, no second guessing. Just a quarterback deciding the play would end on his terms. When he crossed the line, it wasn't just a score, it was a message. This wasn't a quarterback surviving on arm talent alone. That first rushing touchdown carried weight far beyond the points it added. It told defenses they couldn't sit back. It told coordinators they couldn't ignore his legs. And it told everyone watching that Sanders isn't confined to one identity. He can beat you from the pocket, and when that pocket disappears, he becomes something far more difficult to contain. That's what makes this kind of performance so hard to defend against at the next level. Once a quarterback proves he can punish hesitation, everything slows down for the defense. Linebackers freeze, safeties hesitate, pass rushers lose discipline. One wrong step turns into a chain reaction, and Sanders exploited that uncertainty all night. This is where the game shifted from impressive to threatening. Because when a rookie shows he can create without breaking structure, extend plays without chaos, and finish drives with his own legs when it matters most, it forces a completely different level of respect. That's not something that fades, that's something that follows you every week. And the numbers alone didn't explain that impact. What made this moment truly historic was what it placed Sanders alongside, and who it quietly pushed him past.
The most unsettling part of this performance wasn't how good it looked in the moment. It was where it placed Shedeur Sanders in the history of the franchise, because buried beneath all the highlights and reactions was a number that quietly rewrote what was supposed to be possible, especially for someone this early in his career. No Browns player had ever done this before. Not the veterans, not the legends, not the quarterbacks whose names still echo through Cleveland's past. For a franchise that's been around for generations, that kind of statement carries weight. Decades of football, countless systems, endless eras of hope and disappointment, and yet, in just his third professional start, Sanders stepped into a space no one else had occupied. That's what made the stat feel heavy. It wasn't just about production, it was about context. This wasn't a cherry-picked record or a technical milestone padded by circumstance. It was a complete, full-spectrum performance. Dominance through the air, control in critical moments, and the ability to finish drives himself. The kind of night quarterbacks build entire careers chasing. And it happened without warning. Cleveland didn't plan for this moment. The organization wasn't positioned to celebrate it. There was no victory parade waiting on the other side. Instead, it arrived uninvited, forcing the franchise to confront an uncomfortable truth that something special might be unfolding faster than anyone anticipated. What makes this even more striking is who Sanders surpassed by doing it. Players who had stability, players who had continuity, players who weren't navigating uncertainty, criticism, or internal tension. And yet, none of them had combined everything the way Sanders did on that night. Not once, not ever. That's when the conversation shifted, because records like this don't just live in box scores. They become reference points. They get mentioned years later when someone else comes close. They quietly set expectations, even when teams aren't ready for them. And for a franchise that spent years searching for consistency under center, this one landed like a warning shot. The timing couldn't have been worse, or better. Worse because it exposed how fragile the situation around him really was. Better because it offered something Cleveland has struggled to find for far too long. Proof, not projections, not hope. Proof that the ceiling might be higher than anyone dared to admit. And that's why this stat mattered more than the award itself. Because once a rookie enters the record books this early, the question stops being whether he has potential and starts becoming whether the organization is capable of keeping up. And that's where the tension outside the field became impossible to ignore. What made this moment feel even heavier was everything swirling around it. Because while Sanders was putting together the most complete performance of his young career, the environment around him was anything but calm. There's been a lot of buzz behind the scenes, with reports suggesting the Browns were dealing with mounting internal pressure that had nothing to do with what was happening on the field. According to multiple reports, emergency conversations were happening at the organizational level. Coaching decisions were being questioned, leadership was under scrutiny, and patience, already thin, was wearing down fast. None of this was confirmed publicly in detail, but the timing raised eyebrows. A rookie quarterback breaks through, and suddenly the foundation around him starts to feel unstable. It's been said that some within the fan base, and even inside the building, were frustrated with how Sanders was handled early on. The hesitation, the mixed signals, the feeling that his development timeline was being influenced by factors other than performance. Whether those frustrations were justified or not, the perception alone created tension, and perception has a way of shaping reality in the NFL. What made the situation so uncomfortable is that Sanders never addressed any of it. He didn't feed into the noise, he didn't hint at dissatisfaction, he didn't push back publicly or ask for reassurance. Instead, he responded the only way a young quarterback truly can, by letting his play speak while the conversation around him grew louder. That contrast made everything feel sharper. Chaos off the field, composure on it. And that's where speculation really took hold. Some reports claim the organization was being forced to confront questions it wasn't ready to answer yet. Questions about direction, about accountability, about whether the current structure was built to support a quarterback who might be ahead of schedule. None of that was officially confirmed, but when moments like this happen, silence often says more than statements. What's clear is that this performance didn't happen in a vacuum. Sanders wasn't thriving inside a perfectly aligned system. He wasn't benefiting from long-term stability or unquestioned leadership. If anything, he was operating in the middle of uncertainty and producing anyway. That's what made it uncomfortable, because success under chaos exposes everything that isn't working around it. And when a rookie forces that kind of reckoning, organizations don't always respond gracefully. The most unsettling part wasn't the rumors themselves, it was how believable they felt in context. Because history has shown what happens when young quarterbacks shine before their teams are ready to protect them.
Which is why what came next mattered even more than the noise, especially when the head coach finally spoke. Amid all the speculation and outside noise, the Browns didn't rush out a dramatic statement. There was no press conference designed to quiet rumors or shift blame. Instead, the message came quietly, and that's what made it matter. When head coach Kevin Stefanski finally spoke, he didn't lean into hype, and he didn't dodge reality. He focused on details, the kind of details that tell you how a quarterback is really being viewed inside the building. Stefanski pointed to Sanders' footwork and pocket presence, two areas that don't show up in highlight clips, but often determine whether a young quarterback survives in this league. That wasn't accidental praise. Coaches don't mention those traits unless they're seeing something real develop in real time. Footwork is discipline. Pocket presence is awareness. Together, they form the foundation that separates flashes from longevity. What stood out even more was how Stefanski framed Sanders' progress. He didn't talk about raw talent. He didn't bring up athletic gifts or arm strength. He talked about work, preparation, commitment from the moment Sanders arrived. That kind of language quietly dismantled the narrative that had followed him, the idea that he wasn't ready, wasn't prepared, or was being propped up by reputation. According to the head coach, the work was already there long before the spotlight found him. Those comments carried weight because they weren't defensive. Stefanski didn't feel the need to justify starting him. He didn't frame Sanders as a surprise or an exception. He spoke about development the way coaches talk about players they believe in, honestly, patiently, and without urgency. He acknowledged that Sanders was early in his career, that mistakes would happen, and that growth doesn't come from avoiding those moments, but from experiencing them. That perspective matters because it signals trust without pressure. It tells you the coaching staff isn't panicking.
It tells you they're watching the tape everyone else is and seeing progress where others see risk. Most importantly, it suggests they understand something fans often forget. Quarterbacks aren't built in practice alone. They're built in live reps, under real pressure, when decisions have consequences. Stefanski's comments also reframed the conversation around mistakes. Instead of treating them as red flags, he described them as learning tools, moments that can't be replicated in walkthroughs or meetings. That's not coach speak. That's the mindset of someone invested in long-term growth, not short-term optics. It suggests Sanders isn't being evaluated on perfection, but on how quickly he absorbs lessons and applies them. And that changes everything. Because when a head coach speaks like that, it signals alignment, or at least an attempt at it. It tells the locker room this quarterback isn't on borrowed time. It tells the front office
Development is the priority. And it tells Sanders himself that his approach is being noticed, not just his results. But praise doesn't erase reality. Because even with trust, even with progress, there are still flaws, and they're impossible to ignore. For all the excitement this performance created, there's no pretending the picture is flawless. And that's actually what makes this story more believable, not less. Sanders hasn't been perfect, and anyone trying to paint him that way isn't paying attention. The mistakes are there, they're on tape, and they're part of the reason this breakout feels earned instead of manufactured. There have been throws he'd want back, moments where patience ran out a beat too early, situations where the NFL's speed closed in faster than expected. Those interceptions didn't come from carelessness, they came from confidence pushing up against reality, from trying to make plays in windows that exist in college but vanish in the pros. Every young quarterback goes through that adjustment, and Sanders is no exception. Then there's the pressure. He's taken hits, he's been brought down more than he'd like. Some of that falls on him, holding the ball too long, trusting the play to develop when the defense had already won the snap. Learning when to live for the next down is one of the hardest lessons for quarterbacks who believe they can make something out of nothing. And Sanders absolutely believes that. But not all of it is on him. Protection hasn't always held up. Routes haven't always separated cleanly. Timing with receivers is still forming. That matters, especially for a rookie still building chemistry at the NFL level. What looks like hesitation on the surface often comes from a quarterback waiting for trust to meet opportunity, and that doesn't happen overnight. What's encouraging is how these flaws are showing up. They aren't reckless, they aren't panicked, they aren't repeating in the same way every week. Instead, they feel like moments of overreach rather than misunderstanding, like a quarterback testing boundaries, not guessing at them. That distinction is important because it points toward refinement instead of reinvention, and refinement is teachable. The areas Sanders needs to improve, decision speed, internal clock, knowing when to escape versus stand tall, are exactly the areas that tend to sharpen with experience. They don't require a complete overhaul. They require reps, film, time under pressure, the same time he's already proving he can handle without shrinking. That's why the flaws don't overshadow the progress.
They frame it. They give it shape. They remind everyone watching that this isn't a finished product being dropped into place. It's a foundation being built in real time. And the foundation matters more than the surface. Because once a quarterback shows he can succeed while still learning, the ceiling becomes harder to ignore. Which leads to the question Cleveland can't avoid any longer. For all the excitement this performance created, there's no pretending the picture is flawless, and that's actually what makes this story more believable, not less. Sanders hasn't been perfect, and anyone trying to paint him that way isn't paying attention. The mistakes are there, they're on tape, and they're part of the reason this breakout feels earned instead of manufactured. There have been throws he'd want back, moments where patience ran out a beat too early, situations where the NFL's speed closed in faster than expected. Those interceptions didn't come from carelessness, they came from confidence colliding with reality, from trying to make plays in windows that exist 1 second and disappear the next.
Every young quarterback has to recalibrate that timing, and Sanders is right in the middle of that process. Then there's the pressure. He's taken hits, he's been brought down more than anyone would like. Some of that responsibility is his, holding the ball an extra moment, trusting a play to develop when the defense had already broken it down. Learning when to give up on a play instead of trying to bend it into something special is one of the hardest lessons for quarterbacks who believe they can create, and Sanders clearly believes that. But not all of it falls on him. Protection hasn't always been clean. Routes haven't always come open on schedule. Chemistry with receivers is still forming in real time. Those details matter more in the NFL than anywhere else. What looks like hesitation from the outside is often a quarterback waiting for trust to match opportunity, and that trust takes time to build. What makes these flaws easier to live with is how they're showing up. They don't feel panicked. They don't look careless. They aren't the same mistake repeating itself every drive. Instead, they feel like growing pains, moments of overconfidence rather than confusion. That distinction matters, because it suggests Sanders understands what he's seeing, even if he's still learning how quickly he needs to react. And those are fixable problems. Decision speed, internal clock, knowing when to escape and when to stand tall. These aren't limitations, they're milestones, the kind that sharpen with reps, film study, and real game experience. The same experience Sanders is already proving he can handle without shrinking under the weight of it.
That's why the flaws don't undercut the story. They ground it. They make it real. They remind everyone watching that this isn't a polished final product being dropped into place. It's a foundation being built under pressure, in public, without a safety net. And once a quarterback shows he can grow while still producing, the conversation shifts in a way Cleveland can't ignore anymore. This is the moment where everything gets complicated, because once a rookie proves he can perform at this level, the focus stops being on his development and shifts to the people around him. The Browns are no longer evaluating potential, they're being evaluated themselves. And what they do next will matter just as much as anything Sanders does on the field. There's a clear fork in the road now. One path is stability, commitment, allowing Sanders to remain the unquestioned starter while building the offense around what he already does well. That means tailoring schemes to his strengths, reinforcing protection, and giving him continuity instead of constant recalibration. Young quarterbacks don't need perfection, they need clarity. They need to know the ground beneath them isn't shifting every week. The other path is the one Cleveland knows all too well. Indecision, mixed messaging, short-term reactions driven by outside noise instead of long-term vision. That's the path where talent gets stalled, timelines get rushed or reset, and progress turns into frustration. History shows how quickly momentum can disappear when organizations fail to protect their quarterbacks from instability. What makes this decision so urgent is timing. Sanders isn't asking for years to figure things out. He's already producing while learning. That accelerates expectations, whether the team is ready for them or not. The Browns can either match that pace with structure and support, or risk falling behind their own quarterback. Support doesn't just mean words, it means investment in the offensive line, in playmakers who can separate, in a system that doesn't force Sanders to be perfect just to function. It also means insulating him from organizational noise, so his growth isn't disrupted by uncertainty he can't control. Because here's the reality Cleveland has to face. Quarterbacks like this don't wait forever. Windows open quickly and close just as fast. When a player shows he can elevate those around him, the margin for error shifts to the franchise. Talent stops being the question. Leadership does. And that's what makes this moment so heavy. The Browns finally have something real under center. Not hype, not projection, not hope built on desperation. Something tangible. Something developing in front of everyone's eyes.
What happens next will reveal whether this organization has actually learned from its past, or if history is about to repeat itself with a different name on the jersey. Because this isn't just about Shedeur Sanders anymore. It's about whether Cleveland is ready to grow at the same speed he is. When people look back on this moment, the award itself probably won't be the first thing they remember. Trophies come and go. Weekly honors fade into stat pages and footnotes. What will last is what this moment signaled and why it arrived when it did. This wasn't about being named Rookie of the Week. It was about validation at a time when doubt was loud. It was about a rookie stepping into uncertainty and responding with control instead of chaos. It was about showing that the flashes weren't accidents and that the confidence wasn't misplaced. The league didn't reward potential here. It acknowledged reality. And reality can be uncomfortable. Because once a quarterback proves he belongs, the safety nets disappear. Excuses dry up. Patience gets replaced by expectation. That's the price of recognition, and Sanders just paid the entry fee. From this point forward, he won't be measured against other rookies. He'll be measured against standards Cleveland has chased for years. What makes this moment so important is the timing. This didn't happen in a clean rebuild or a calm transition. It happened in the middle of questions, pressure, and uncertainty. Instead of shrinking, Sanders expanded. Instead of waiting for clarity, he created it. And that's what separates players who survive the league from the ones who reshape franchises. But here's the part that lingers. Cleveland finally has a quarterback who can change the conversation. The real question is whether the organization will let that conversation evolve or interrupt it. Because talent alone doesn't guarantee anything. Alignment does. Stability does. Vision does. This moment didn't promise championships. It didn't guarantee success. What it did was remove doubt about one thing. Shedeur Sanders is not the problem. He's the opportunity. And opportunities don't wait. What happens next won't just define his career. It will define whether the Browns are ready to stop repeating the same story with a different ending.